I will say we do have a pilgrimage coming up in June. If you are interested, if what Ron has been saying today is striking something deep in you and you'd like to try something out that's, bounded by about 6 days or a week of walking with other men and taking risks, we'd love to have you go to our website and check that out and sign up for a pilgrimage with us.
Hey, welcome back to Ruck the Way, everybody.
Welcome.
We're here with a really special guest, a dear friend and brother of ours, Ron Dasher. Welcome to Ruck the Way, Ron.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Ron, good to see you. I know you and Gabe have met live and in the flesh. I've only met on a screen, so here we are again, once again on the screen, but it's good to see you. Good to have you here.
Yeah, excited to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
And I think you guys win the prize for like the best background on podcast. I don't know if there's like a podcast award show. We had the Oscars last night, but Ron, you got some interesting stuff going on. I know there's a story of the room that you're in. Like, I think you're in your man cave. Is that right?
Yeah, man cave / office. But kind of a space that I created to obviously work in, but also to host some men's groups in. And it's been a really great gift, I think, for guys to have a space that's created for them and has some masculine properties, but also things that represent me and things that I love as well.
Yeah, tell us about a couple of things behind you.
Keep it wild, I'm seeing. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, anything outdoors for me is a huge place of rest, and obviously it aligns with what you guys are doing here. But just getting outside is a big deal to me. So whether that's hiking or hunting or fishing, but something that gets me outdoors, and then something that I can do with a buddy. And so fishing is probably the main thing, but anything that I can do in a group or with a couple guys and just creates conversation. So walking, journeying together, as you guys are talking about on here, is definitely a piece of that as well.
The outdoor man's hunting, fishing, shooting. Ron does it all.
He does.
Get me outside.
For those of you who are just listening, I just want you to know that Ron has got some facial hair going on here today. And you were telling us about a upcoming trip that you're going to be doing with some of your buddies, exactly what you're talking about. And I would love for you to tell people what the name of that time together is in regards to your facial hair, because I thought that was perfect.
Yeah, well, I think this is our 15th or 16th trip together.
Wow.
So we've done it twice a year, about every 6 months, me and two guys. And it's called Clashes with Stashes, which I'm not really sure what the clash is, although we compete with each other for biggest fish at the end of the trip. But we all grow mustaches. And so that's the biggest deal is, you can't show up to the trip without at least a halfway decent mustache or we'll leave you behind. But we go fishing for a couple of days, just have a good time, unplugging, getting away from the day-to-day responsibilities. And it's always a blast.
Respect, man. Respect.
And there's something so cool about like 15 years of hanging out with the same guys. I think that's like such a rare thing in the world. I'm just curious for you, Ron, like what is like building friendships like that for that long a time with other guys? Like what has that meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. I think it's easier, when you know someone a long time. I mean, we all have those high school or college friends that, you can pick up the phone and just call and you kind of pick things back up with where you left off. And some of that is super easy and I think convenient in many ways. And at the same time, it takes a lot of work and intentionality, and those relationships don't just happen. You actually have to invest in those, and like your marriage or like any other relationship, like you have to take the time to prioritize it. And I think guys in today's culture can easily slip into like, I'll do that later, or that's not super important. And don't make the time for it and send out a text or ask a guy, hey, let's grab coffee or lunch, or you want to come over and hang out for a little bit by the fire. And you miss out on a lot of those relationships. So I'm a super like high tradition person. And it's funny, somebody's asking me like how you keep something like this going. And I said, hey, at the end of every trip, we set the date for the next trip, and it's locked in, and our families kind of know that at this point, and we make it a priority. And of course we love it, but it kind of removes some of the pressure of like, man, do I even have the ability to do this? Can I make time for it? Because by now I think our families and spouses have seen the value in it, and that's a beautiful thing too.
I think the word that keeps coming to my mind is, I'm hearing you talk, Ron, is it's intentional, that you have woven in intentionality into everything, knowing that that's such a high value. I'm curious if you can think back to maybe when you guys started that 15 years ago and where you are now. How have you seen the progression of those relationships over the 15 years?
Well, it's funny, like, you kind of start out and you're feeling each other out, and you're more or less like on your best behavior. Like, all right, I don't want to upset this guy or whatever. Now 15 trips later, it's like, whatever. They know me for who I am. But in kind of a cool way. I mean, you do know the things that are going to set them off and the things that they're going to be cool with, and you kind of know your roles in the trip. I think especially when you do something like this or like a pilgrimage, you kind of know like, all right, I'm really type A. I've got to have these certain things, these certain ways. Other guys care more or less about the food or about the weather. They're not going to put up with rain or wind. This guy's not going to put up with eating McDonald's every meal. So you kind of learn those things about each other, and it's a give and take. I mean, like anything else, but it does make it easy to slip into those trips a lot more often, and you don't have to worry about it as much because you just kind of pick up, like I said, where you left off, and that makes it a lot of fun.
That is like pilgrimage. Yeah, that's like a 15-year pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Twice a year. That's exactly what that is.
Yeah,
that's great.
A pilgrimage on a boat.
On a boat.
I like it. Which can either go really well or really poorly. I can imagine there's a lot of good boat stories over 15 years.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you hope you catch something.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm sure you guys do. I'm sure you bring it, you haul it in. I'm thinking about like 15 years of being with the same guys. Like that's a piece of a story. That's a thread of your story. And I would imagine for you guys, like that trip has become like a mile marker along each year, something that I know you look forward to, and that it kind of marks the years over time. I'm curious for you, because we've, had a lot of conversations around, the theme of story, but when did you first really start to see, your life trajectory through the lens of story?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, probably not until fairly recently. I don't think I would look back 10 years ago now and say like, oh yeah, I have this story. Let me tell you my life story. I work in ministry, and so oftentimes I sit across from people who are new to the faith, they're new to the church, and so they'll ask me a little bit about myself. How'd you end up here? How'd you get? And so I had kind of this like 2 to 3 minute version that I would share. And if they're curious and if they allowed, like, could expand on different parts. But by and large, I wouldn't say like, oh yeah, I saw my life as this story and here's where God intersected it. I just saw it probably as different parts. And looking back now, I can see threads that have been woven through those. But at the time, I mean, 5 or 6 years ago, I wouldn't say like I saw it through that lens.
Well, I'd love to hear. It's interesting you say, the 3 minute story. I think like those listeners who've been particularly in a professional ministry setting know exactly what you're talking about. I think guys in business too, like we all have this sort of like introductory, acceptable version of our story that like is the right mix of impressive but not too much. Like we just want to share just enough to get some street cred, but not so much that people are like, oh, you're weird, or you've got some stuff going on.
It's the napkin speech, what you can do in the elevator, right?
That's right, the elevator. Yep. Yeah, it's almost like we treat our story as like a marketing scheme. Here's the elevator version, and the point is to just to get credibility. But I'd be curious, since that's not what we're about on this podcast and this community. I'd love to hear kind of another version of your story of like whatever you'd like to share about your story. And I think for two reasons. One, obviously, like we want listeners to get to know you as we do a little bit, but also as a way of example, because I think so many people would go, if you said, "Hey, tell your story," we just have like no idea how to do that. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of it just as a way of modeling, like what does it mean to tell your story to strangers, even in a way that's not a marketing kind of plan.
Wow. Well, a lot of pressure. I better knock this out of the park here. But yeah, I can share a little bit about me, and I think at different points kind of pause and just name big themes that have carried through my life. So I'll start with family of origin, where I grew up, where all of our stories begin, and I think some really major threads that we carry to this day. So I grew up in Georgia, in Augusta. My parents were in the church there, and are still in the same church, in the same house, had the same careers their whole lives. So when I say like I'm high tradition, I think it stems a lot from that, just having these routines throughout childhood. And so I grew up there and had a great like church experience, prayed to receive Christ when I was young. And I would say as much as I knew as a kid at that stage of life, that's where I met Jesus. And then fast forward through high school, was involved in youth group, but wasn't really fully understanding what it meant to be a follower of the way. And so when I came to college, left Augusta, went to a small school in South Carolina, Presbyterian College. I got involved in a ministry called Campus Outreach. And the way I got involved, I think was really thematic through my life too, was by way of invitation. And so this guy, I distinctly remember playing Madden in my freshman dorm with my roommate. Like we were like, this is great. We're just able to play Xbox and hang out in the evenings and study a little bit. But, we were new to college and living on our own. And this guy comes around, freshman dorm, and he starts knocking on doors. And he's like, hey, I want to invite you guys to our Tuesday night gathering. We're like, no, we got more important things to do. But sure enough, like week after week, he would come around and we'd be doing different things. But we told him no a couple times. And finally, this guy named Ben, he wore us down. We're like, all right, let's just go. So he invited us to this gathering called Campus Outreach. They did a Tuesday night kind of worship gathering and got to meet some folks. And then from there, he invited me into a discipleship group, which was a small group of 5 or 6 guys. And that was really the first time I'd ever been intentionally invested in by an older guy. And I mean, it was life-changing for me. That really shaped the whole trajectory of my life from that point. Because after a few years of being in that Bible study men's group, that was what shifted me from, hey, I want to go with this route in my career to I want to do this, some version of what he's doing here. I want to do that for others for the rest of my life, because I feel like that is so impactful. And then just the way that, Ben invited me in, I felt so seen and acknowledged, and he wanted me to be there, which he did. But I think that speaks volumes, especially to men. So anyway, was in Campus Outreach and involved there. From there, went to seminary in the Raleigh-Durham area. My wife and I started dating at at PC our senior year, but we went to separate grad schools, and so traveled a couple hours for 2 years, visiting each other and talking on the phone every night. What I learned, looking back now, was like a lot of communication skills that I probably needed, and then we got married and moved to the Charlotte area in 2011, and from there had 2 kids. So I have a son, Grady, who's 12, almost 13 this summer, and then a daughter, Karis, who is 10, just turned 10 in February. And so we're in a great stage of life. Have been in Charlotte since 2011, bounced around a couple different spots on the south side, but currently live in Matthews, and we love it. And I would say, now just being here, being in ministry for 10 years, really feel super settled, and so grateful for that. But to rewind a little bit, when we moved in 2011, so between 2011 and 2015, there was a window where I had a seminary degree, was looking for ministry roles, but couldn't find anything. And I would say that was a big theme to those 4 years of kind of my wilderness, if you will, and a season I look back on now and am grateful for, but at the time was like, what is going on? Why does God have me here? But worked in loss mitigation world for a call center, smiling and dialing, as they said, for 8 hours a day, which is horrible.
That's such a great thing for you, Ron. Though. This fits you perfectly.
Yeah. Yes. Overjoyed. People love it when you're calling about their mortgage they've defaulted on.
You build resilience. I bet you did.
Yeah. Yes. Built resilience. Did that, and then worked in the sales world for a couple years, and learned some skills there. That I would say transferred into what I'm doing now. Both of those, but at the time, again, didn't know what God was doing. Didn't really. I mean, in context of story, was like, what are these chapters that I'm writing here in these 4 years, and why am I writing them? But looking back now, can definitely see that. So yeah, that's probably a little bit longer version than what you bargained for.
No, that's
hopefully what you wanted.
More than the napkin. That's what we wanted.
Yes, that's exactly. And I mean, there's so many things that you brought up that we can dive into, but I want to go back to Ben. And that, because I think like when we tell our stories, it's like key moments, like there's these pivotal moments, it's like all time isn't equal when it comes to our lives and our story. Like there's these moments that, just emerge as significant where something changes. But I think like, it's one of those things like when we're in it, we can't see it. It's only years later you can look back and understand, oh, that was a moment. And I think for so many people, like they're in a moment right now, that's that's probably a moment they're going to look back on and say, oh yeah, that's where something shifted. But when you're in that moment, man, it doesn't feel like maybe things are turning or this is something big that's happening. I'm just curious, you 18-year-old Ron sitting there playing Madden, what was that like for you, like being a freshman in college, like at that time where you met Ben? And I want to go back to like before you accept the invitation, because this guy is persistent and he keeps coming around and you keep like, you kind of ignore him for a while. What was it like to be kind of in that moment in your story before you actually accepted his invitation?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, like you said, you don't think about those pivotal years until you look back and you're like, man, like those years really are important. And I would say, I mean, those first few years of living on your own, trying to figure out life and what matters to you as an individual and as a man in this case. But I was like, man, I'm kind of living for what I want to do when I want to do it. And was kind of annoyed, at first at the invitation, like, I can't believe he's trying to get me to do something I don't want to do. But then slowly over time, recognize like, man, I think I feel valued, I feel seen. feel wanted, and so that invitation started to seep in, and just the persistence of it. I think it takes a really special person to do campus ministry. That's a huge calling, and so grateful for those folks who are doing that work, because it matters. When you look back at folks that are in those seasons of life, the young adult years, young professional years, college years, those are super transformative and can really lay the groundwork in a new path, to use a pilgrimage language, for the rest of your life, which it did for me. And so looking back, and in even future conversations, have been able to call back to those guys who really invested in me early on and say thank you, because you never know how the power of that invitation, how much weight it carries.
That's so good.
Oh, that's so true.
Ron, I'm curious, like the word, we use the word invitation, a bunch. And I know for us, that's such an important word. I know for you and your ministry now, that's such an important word. But what is so powerful about an invitation?
I mean, I think so many people just kind of drift through life, men, women, as you get into adult years, like you're just kind of flowing with the culture, whether you realize it or not. These are things I should be doing. This is what people around me are doing. It's kind of the comparison trap. And I do think invitation, it requires a sort of step toward someone, and in an intentional way, almost out of that drifting current and into something more intentional. And I think that's powerful when people feel, because it's not normal, right? Like people don't just really go out of their way to, hey, I want to hang out with you. I want to get to know you. I want to hear your story. You matter. There's something intriguing about you, or something I want to learn from you. I mean, that just doesn't happen by and large. And so when it does happen, I think people take notice. And, much like in our faith, the way that Jesus saw the disciples when they were fishing and he invited them, that changed everything, because these guys had been passed over for years by other rabbis. And so to have someone say, hey, come follow me, come spend time with me, come journey with me, that matters so much. And already out of the gate, you're feeling like this sense of being seen and trusted and known before any other words are even spoken. It's just that powerful of an invitation.
Yeah, Ron, what struck me too was this kind of thread of intentionality that you have felt yourself, and now I know you're offering to other men. So I would like to ask you just about this ministry that you have been involved in called the Iron Collective, because that seems to me to, again, follow that thread of intentionality in your life. You've been invited, and now you're inviting other men. So I'd love to hear about Iron Collective, what it is, what it's about, what kind of invitations are you offering to other men, and how are they being affected by that?
Yeah, well, Iron Collective, kind of aims right at the heart of that in many ways. Like I said, I think a lot of men, this is a men's ministry. So I think a lot of men are really drifting through life, or feeling the pressure to, like, I've got to add something else on. If only I did XYZ more, then I would be a better husband, better father, a better Christian. And whether that's go to church or pray or do more date nights or do more different things. But what Iron Collective, at the heart of it, is really not adding more things to a guy's plate. It's really turning their focus inward, toward their own heart, toward their own story, and getting more in touch with who they are, and then raising that self-awareness to how they show up today. And so the way that's done is really kind of two parts, two movements. The first semester is all about their box talk, their story. We use this tool called the box talk, where you bring 3 items and you share your story through those 3 items. And each guy does that. And so you have an opportunity to hear other stories. And then the second movement is called the mask. And that's really all about how you show up today. Because I think deep in each man, in his heart, has this imposter syndrome. And so you put up this mask and you say, hey, I'm going to project this, but this is what I'm really hiding behind. And it all kind of calls back to Genesis 3, where Adam and Eve were naked and afraid, and so they hid from God, if you remember that story in the garden. And so that's really the heartbeat behind it. That's what we've been doing ever since. And so that's the idea of guys really taking down their mask. But in order to do that, you have to have a safe group of men to do that with. And so you have to build this high commitment, high trust environment. And the way you do it is not by fixing one another or by saying, hey, you should do this more, do that more when a guy shares, but by asking questions, by being curious, by continuing to invite them in and help them really peel back the layers of their heart that they don't even know are there, but primarily through questions and curiosity.
How do you find most men when they come into the Iron Collective? I mean, what's maybe their biggest struggle to kind of get over that hump of being willing to share their story and to go to some of these places that typically are tough for men to go to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all over the spectrum. Some guys have literally never thought about their story before. And so this is the first time they've ever shared their story out loud, or they've shared it with someone in a, kind of a 10 to 15 minute time frame. But I think it's a really tough exercise for a lot of guys, especially when you talk about sharing, real parts of your story, not just kind of the surface level, hey, was born here, live here, got married here, work there, but really talk about deeper parts of their story, points of pain and past trauma and things that they carry to this day, but they may not even recognize at that juncture that they are carrying those. And so the beauty of a group and doing this work out of the context of just an individual is that you have others around you who, as you share those things, and then as you transition to the current day and how you're showing up, they can say, hey, have you ever thought about this? Or have you noticed this? Some of these threads of kind of past core lies or things that you're tempted to believe that now show up today, but we may not even recognize they do. And so you actually we were designed that way. God designed us to have community around us to reflect that back to us in a way that is helpful for us, but it is also really God honoring, reminding guys over and over again of, you may think this about yourself, but here's what God says about you. And we need that truth spoken to us so many times, probably every day.
Like, in some ways, as you're sharing that, it seems like, oh yeah, like that's so obvious, but it's like one of those things that's like the simple truth is actually the hardest truth. And, I think so many of us recognize, if we're being honest, that like what you're describing, though it's simple, is very elusive. It's very hard to, I think we all want that. Like, we want a safe place to be able to like be real and be honest. And yet probably a lot of guys are terrified of, of that. How do you, like, what does it look like to invite a guy in, and sort of what do you do? Like, how do you reduce those barriers to entry? How do you make it, like, when you say like it needs to be a safe space, like what does that mean to create safety for men?
Yeah. I mean, it is super intimidating, I think, for a lot of guys. And I think about this quote from Brene Brown a lot, where she says that vulnerability is what we most desire to see in another, but what we're most afraid to show in ourselves. And the reality is that most guys are super afraid to be vulnerable. Men and women are super afraid to be vulnerable until they've seen it from another. And so I would say that's one of the biggest ways, is just by modeling it, by leaders going first in those groups. We have the prerequisite of leading an Iron Collective group is having been an Iron Collective. And there isn't really much more to it than that, but we're committed to guys not leading that haven't been invited in, haven't experienced it. And so when they do turn around and lead, all we're asking them to do is do for another what someone did for you. And so in that way, you do have to model vulnerability. You do have to go first. But when you do, and if you do it well, I mean, it opens up the group in an amazing way, and guys feel like, oh, this is a safe space where I can really talk about what's going on And that's super scary for a lot of guys, super intimidating. And I've heard multiple guys come back after a couple weeks of their leaders sharing their story, and they're like, man, like I didn't know it was going to be like this. I thought we were going to do a Bible study. I thought we were going to kind of, pray for our aunt's cat. I didn't know we were going to be
that real,
really talking about, that real, what's going on in our heart. And so, yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I think if you can get over that fear, if you can put yourself out there, so to speak, and just trust that guys are gonna cover you, that they're for you, that they do love you, and you build this, you can build this incredible brotherhood through that. And another way is really by the commitment of it. I think that speaks volumes when men prioritize these groups. They're not meeting every week, they're meeting a couple times a month, but if you prioritize the group over your kids' practice, over working late, over different things, which aren't bad things, but you do have to say, for a year, I'm going to set aside this year, I'm going to prioritize these groups. And that speaks volumes to the other men around you as well. Like, he's making a sacrifice to be here for me and with me. And that, just speaks a lot in our current culture of convenience.
Ron, you used the word fear when you were discussing how men might experience coming into a group like that. And I think that men particularly will take sort of this risk reward ratio and just think, okay, this is risky. Is the reward going to be worth it? If I take the risk and make that leap into vulnerability, then the reward better be pretty high. So I'm wondering if you could maybe paint for us and for our listeners a picture of the reward, and maybe even from your own life or from experiences of others without using their names. But what is the reward like when you actually take that leap into vulnerability and risk?
Well, I'd say it's definitely worth it. If there's any guy out there who's like, I don't know if this is, life's going pretty good, I kind of got a handle on it. It's definitely worth it. And I've seen many men shy away from it because they haven't counted the costs and deemed it worthy. But I think to those that do, I mean, it really opens up your world in a different way. You may have used this on here because I heard it from Gabe, but it's about showing up fully present and fully alive. And those two words, fully present in relationship in a different way, showing up, for your spouse, for your kids, for your coworkers, for yourself, in a different way than you typically had in the past. Because I think we so often just bring pieces of ourselves unintentionally in parts, but also fully alive. And I think that's the beautiful piece of fully alive and who God created you to be, not needing anything from another person or consuming folks in relationship, but really just showing up saying, hey, I have all that I need. My identity is anchored in Jesus. I'm not showing up wanting or needing anything from anyone else. And that's the beauty of being fully alive and who God created you to be. And we're all, none of us will arrive on this side of eternity in that, I'm convinced, but to take big steps there actually just frees you in relationships so much, helps you get out of your story and operating in these places of wounding and past hurts and family of origin stuff, and showing up in a way that is a settled man, identity anchored. And I think that's what culture needs more than anything right now is men and women who can show up that way for their families and their communities.
And Ron, you talk about like identity and this idea of men, and men and women, but men particularly that we're talking about right now, like bringing their question, and I think like maybe some people don't know like what that question is, but I think we're talking about like a question of worth, a question of identity. Like there's a series of questions that we're asking internally about ourselves, like, am I worthy? Am I enough? Do I have what it takes? Things like that. And so as you've been walking with so many men over the last several years in this kind of work, what do you see happen like when men don't have those questions resolved? Like, what are they doing with that question that ends up being destructive?
Hey, Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I mean, I think especially in these middle years of life, which that's the primary audience more or less for Iron Collective. We wouldn't say, hey, a guy in his 20s, you shouldn't join. But really it's that 30s, 40s, 50s, um, men that are in that season of life where I mean, we've heard it, you have the midlife crisis, or you do something in your life to kind of drop a grenade on it in order to blow it up. And there's different reasons and different motivations for that. But I think one of the primary reasons is you hit this season of life where you've accomplished a lot, and there are no more lands to conquer, in many ways, career wise or family wise. You're sort of settling in, and that can feel like the walls are just closing in around you. And guys lose themselves in that. And I think because primarily their identity has been built upon, hey, I've got this next thing. There's always something next career, next, I'm getting married, then I'm going to have kids. And then when a midlife crisis happens, they're trying to do that again. Oh, there's something else out there I need to reconquer, and to start over. I deserve to be happy, those things. But it's really at the heart of it is it's a shift from that transition from conquering, king to kind of what we would call, and you guys, I've heard you reference, the sage, an individual who can make that shift into what's my role now. And a true sage, you can only be a true sage, I'm convinced, if you have a settled identity anchored, in something beyond yourself, in Jesus. And so I think that's really important for men to wrestle with, their story and their heart, their desires, their deep desires, their emotions, their thoughts, their will, all of those components, in order to arrive at this sage place, and not kind of start over in this conquering, conqueror type mentality that they're just going to keep striving, and on to the next thing. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I think a lot of guys get stuck in that in between world.
Yeah, I think it's so important that you're naming the middle of life as because you're right. We do hear cliches about that. We do, the midlife crisis, the whatever. That I think sometimes just gets normalized. Like, oh, boys are going to be boys. What you're going to do. You're going to do what you're going to do. But it's like the image that's coming to mind as you're talking, Ron, is like, maybe this is being provoked a little bit, because we were talking about boats and being out on the water before we hit record this morning. But like just the image is like being out on the ocean, like on a voyage, across the Atlantic, and maybe you get out in the middle, and that's got to be, I've never done a transatlantic passage, but I can imagine like that's a pretty scary moment, especially if if you're the one driving the boat, and like all of a sudden you're like, you can't see land, and it feels that's something about like midlife that probably feels that way, that you're like, I can't see land.
That's good.
And these markers, like you mentioned, these life markers that like, oh, I, went to school and I got the job and I got the wife and I did the things. And then when there's all of a sudden, there's no more markers. And those markers were what was guiding you along the way. And then like the tendency is to like strike out and like try to like self-correct, and go back and find the same markers that led you to that middle spot. And they can't, but underneath there's like a current like there's a lot happening under the water. And that was like the real image I was getting. And it's like what you're really talking about is having conversations that are below the surface. Like we're not going to talk about these markers on the surface. We're going to talk about like what's going on, underneath, because that's like the thing. The current is really what's going to drive your boat, So I'm curious, like what kinds of currents do you see, with men, particularly in the middle of life, as they're wrestling with identity? Like what sorts of forces are bearing down on the lives of men in this season of their life?
I mean, I think the obvious answer is some of the things that you named around career and family and kind of this question of like, is this all there is? Is this all I have to look forward to the next however many years? But I would say the stronger currents, probably the unnamed ones, are backwards and really looking at a man's formative years, those childhood years, family of origin, his relationship with his father, which I think is a huge current. And those are the ones that most men would say, those don't impact me. Like, that's in the past. That's something that I left a long time ago. That doesn't have bearing on who I am today. But the reality is, once you start to peel back those layers, and you have other guys in your life who are willing to go into those conversations, those deep waters with you, and you begin to uncover that. That's where most of the currents lie. And if folks have been in counseling or therapy, I mean, that's where most of that begins, for good reasons, because deep in our hearts, we're still kids. We're still boys. We're still middle schoolers. We're still carrying a lot of those pain and hurt, the good and the bad, really, but from those early years. And we don't even realize it's driving us. And we don't even realize those currents are pulling us in a certain direction until we blow up, or this thing sets us off, or we fly off of the handle, and we're like, man, like, what? That was just a minor thing that I got really upset at. Why is that? And you start to really trace those things back, if you can, and if you have the tools to do that, back to your childhood. And but those currents are really strong, and I think most guys just don't even recognize them. But when you have points in your life, which we all do, where someone sinned against you, or you sinned, or things happen in your life where big points of trauma or pain, then yeah, you carry that with you. You learn how to deal with it. You learn how to put up walls or wear masks, or not get wounded like that again. And that ultimately leads you to where you are today, and some of the good parts of you, but also some of the parts that are really scarred over and that you have to unpack in order to move forward.
Have you found that, Ron, in your own story, as you've sort of looked at some of those backward currents in your own life? What has been the reward? Again, I'm thinking risk and reward. What's been the reward for you to be able to go back to some of those places in the past that may be difficult to look at?
Well, I think for me, I mentioned I grew up in Georgia, in a Southern home. We didn't talk about emotion in our house at all. And so through Iron Collective and through this journey for me personally, the past few years, that's become a component of Iron Collective. Every time you gather in groups, guys bring a couple of words that are emotion words. So you've seen different feelings wheels or different ways of talking about that. So have one of those, and you literally look at it and you say, hey, here's how I'm showing up today. Here's the emotions that I'm bringing. And they could be opposite. They could be very similar. And then you share a little bit about those. But instead of bringing, which most men do, like, hey, here's what's going on at work, or here's something I'm dealing with my family, more situational thing, thoughts, you're really driving toward the feelings part of your heart, which most men rarely engage. If they do, it's anger, or if they do, it's like a primary emotion. So for me, that was a huge piece of my story, was actually being able to raise my awareness of what emotions I'm feeling at different points. And still a work in progress, but I think that's been very helpful for me in different relationships, primarily with my wife and my kids, as I've been able to name really quicker as I feel different emotions, like, oh, this is what that's tied to, or, oh, this is why I'm feeling this way. It actually doesn't have to do with you. It has to do more with me, and my heart, and the way I'm showing up, and oftentimes family of origin stuff that I'm carrying in. But if I don't recognize that, I mean, the tendency is to blame another or to justify it in some way. And that's what drives wedges in relationships, and ultimately hurts other people in the process. So I'd say, to answer your question, Chris, I mean, that's been a huge part of my journey the past 4 or 5 years, is just continuing that work of naming, like, how am I showing up today? What am I bringing in to this meeting or this relationship or this date night or whatever it is that I may not otherwise be able to name.
It seems to me that what you're saying is that you're kind of owning your own emotional landscape. You're becoming fluent about what is actually going on inside of you, owning that space. And then, you talked about this before, being fully present. You're able to be present in a way that maybe you weren't before, because you're recognizing exactly where you are, where you're sitting, and kind of what you're bringing to the table at any moment. Say with your wife and your kids, I can imagine for many men that's probably the first place where that kind of emotional fluency is going to have the biggest impact. They're going to be able to be present in a way in their relationships that are closest to them that's impactful for everyone. So you kind of bring a different presence into the room when you can be aware of what's going on in your heart. And I just think that, for many men, that probably sounds like it's a fairy tale. How could I actually get there? But I love that you've described through the work that you do with Iron Collective, you've said that it's a process. It's not something that you tick a box off of when you come to a meeting. That may be the reward, but the process is equally as important, that you're sitting with other men, that you're learning to tell your story, that you're learning to be and be present in a different kind of way. And you're probably challenged by other men too, to think about things that you've never thought about. So I love the way that you kind of laid out that there's a way forward, that it involves a lot of risk. But again, the reward is being a different kind of human at the end, which I think is really beautiful.
There's so many books like 5 ways to be a better dad or 10 ways to be a better husband. And those feel good. It feels like, man, I'm actually accomplishing something. I can do this for, I can do this for a couple weeks or months. But the reality is, like, it's a Band-Aid where you really need to look at what's going on in your heart, what's going on at a much deeper level. And that work takes years. I mean, it doesn't happen by reading a book or listening to a podcast. I mean, it happens by doing deep work with other trusted men around you. And it's really hard, and it takes a lot of energy, emotional energy, physical energy to, show up and be in those groups. And so it's a sacrifice that a lot of men, I think, aren't willing to make, because it's much easier to say, let me just read this thing or listen to this thing or feel better about myself by checking a few boxes.
What strikes me too, Ron, is that I think there's such a tendency, I know for myself, like, to say, hey, I'm gonna fix myself in private, and then I'm gonna put myself on display in public. Like, I want to get around a group of guys and be impressive. I want to be the life of the party. I want to be the man. I want to be, whatever. What is it though that you're seeing? Because what you're describing seems to be the opposite of that. Like, a theme I've heard in this conversation is like that the work of self-awareness, the work of becoming, is a work done with others. And you're describing like how difficult that is. What's the danger if we try to, flip that script and kind of fix ourselves so that we're acceptable? Like what risks are there involved in kind of seeing things that way?
Yeah, I would say the primary risk is that you're just going to miss so much. I think on both the positive and the negative, and I'll start kind of with the negative. I mean, we need other people that can say, hey, this is how you're showing up, or have you thought about this, or have you considered that you may be carrying something into this conversation, this fight you had with your wife 2 nights ago. You need people to be able to ask those questions and just help you think differently, chart some new pathways in the brain. And on the positive side, and I would say this is probably the most important way to think about it, is we need people in our lives who can really speak specific truths to the specific core lies that we believe. And I think for each of us, we have, maybe it's one, maybe it's a handful of core lies that we believe about ourselves, that because of our past, because of things that are happening in our story, we've begun to go, this is true. Like, this is true about me. This is the way I show up. I'm only loved for what I do. I'll never fit in, so on and so forth. There's a whole gamut of those core lies. And we need men in our life to speak specific truths to those. And of course, God does in scripture, but when you pull those out and a guy sitting across from you almost embodies, like in the flesh, God's words to you of, hey, you are beloved. You are a masterpiece. Don't forget these words today. You're loved before you say or do anything. You belong. I mean, those things really matter. And when a guy does that across from another guy, I mean, I can't describe the feeling of just, it's kind of like a balm over a wound where you're like, man, like that felt incredible. It seems super awkward to talk about it on a podcast. But when you have that high level of trust, and love for another guy that you know really well, the good and the bad, I mean, there's nothing like it. And I think that's how God designed us to live that way. And if you try and do that in isolation, it just doesn't have the same impact of doing it in a community.
Listen, Ron, I think so much of the things that you're talking about today, like, are, they're normal for you and for us and for the guys that are in your groups. But I think so like maybe brand new to some people that are listening, like, wow, these are big concepts. If folks want to learn more about the work that you're doing, or kind of just learn more about these kinds of ways of becoming that you're talking about, where can they find your work, and what would you recommend that they read or consume to learn more?
You guys had one of my favorite authors on here earlier, Chris Bruno. So tag back to that episode of the podcast. But I'll say Chris has written some incredible works. He's got 3 books that I've read all those and have reread a couple times. But one, Brotherhood Primer, really kind of describes at a high level, like the concepts of what these groups are. So read that after Iron Collective was formed, but is so similar. And Chris's heartbeat is very much like ours at Iron Collective for men. So I'd say that's a great book. We have a website, ironcollective.org, where you can learn more about the groups themselves. And really my hope is that God will take it and keep multiplying these groups, not because we want to grow some huge ministry, but because I think all guys need this. And my hope is that we can create space for men to step into these groups. But we'll only multiply at the pace of leaders. And so I think that's a huge deal for us, is men stepping into spiritual leadership, which is another huge hurdle for guys who haven't done that before. Maybe the CEO of a company, but when you ask them to lead a group, they're like, oh, wow, okay, this is a new challenge. But yeah, I would say the website, there's a couple resources listed there as well. But would love to have guys check it out and just kind of keep digging in a little bit further.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Ron. And as we're wrapping up here, I think Gabe and I would both say we so appreciate your heart for men. And I think what you've done today is you have actually laid out for men that are listening this incredible picture of what it looks like to take risk, to be intentional and invitational. And I really hope, and I think it will create hunger in men that are listening to say, hey, yeah, I want a part of that. I want to be part of a group of men, a brotherhood that can challenge me in places where I feel like I need to take that risk. So thank you for coming on today and kind of laying that out before us. And we're hoping to get you on a pilgrimage here in Scotland one of these days soon. And in saying that, I will say we do have a pilgrimage coming up in June. If you are interested, if what Ron has been saying today is striking something deep in you and you'd like to try something out that's, bounded by about 6 days or a week of walking with other men and taking risks, we'd love to have you go to our website and check that out and sign up for a pilgrimage with us.
Absolutely. And as we end, we always end with the same thing, which is our little mantra. Just remember, guys, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, whatever you're about, let the walk do the work. All right. Thanks, Ron.
Thanks,
Appreciate
guys.
you.
Thank you, Ron.